The poem is more of an elegy than an epic, looking back in lamentation at one of the proudest warriors of its people. It has been said of Beowulf itself that its weakness lies in placing the unimportant things at the centre and the important things on the outer edges. So Tolkien commented regarding the discourse around Beowulf when he decided to change the discourse back in 1936. What he means by this is that the three bouts of action within the story, first against Grendel and then his mother, and lastly the dragon, at the foreground, and overwhelm the moments in the mead hall, where more cultured curiosities, such as mentions of Sigmund and speculative details regarding the civil wars of Scandinavian peoples lay. However, my personal opinion is that it's these calms and revelries within the mead hall that balance out the action perfectly, as it's in those calms that you discover why Beowulf, and indeed all men, fight in the first place, to preserve what they believe to be the good. Heorot, that remarkable mead hall of King Hrothgar, is order, culture, community, and safety. Tolkien compares it to Camelot because of its both historical and mystical components combined into one. And it's remarkable as well that only very recently, back in 2013, a team of archaeologists, led by a chap called Thomas Christiansen, directed an investigation at Lejre in Denmark, excavate and date this late 5th, early 6th century building, which was most likely the first royal hall. And it seems to be the very hall that was attributed to Beowulf, the legend, the Heorot from Beowulf's tale. And you can just imagine this place in those dark ages brimming with life and culture and vitality, and juxtaposing that with the outside, with its untamed, unknown regions of the wild. It's easy to understand why those people might have thought that demonic forces were actively seeking to threaten that peace. But in that battle for order against chaos, Beowulf establishes himself as a very archetypical example of the warrior from the pedigree of Germanic heroic legend. Beowulf's ambitions for glory and honour are inextricably linked with his goodness. You cannot have honour without loyalty, and you cannot claim glory without heroism. And fortunately for Beowulf, his enemies are not characters of any moral complexity. Even though he does fight other mortal men in more traditional warfare during his life in Frisia and Sweden, this is not the focus of the story. Therefore, the poem avoids the moral grey of human conflict as found in other texts such as the much more ancient Iliad. In a further comparison to the ancient Greek tradition, the American writer R.W. Chambers observed in his Beowulf and the Heroic Age, comparing Beowulfian monsters to those of ancient Greek legend, Odysseus is struggling with a monstrous and wicked foe, but he is not exactly thought of as struggling with the powers of darkness. Polyphemus, by devouring his guests, acts in the way which is hateful to Zeus and the other gods. Yet the Cyclops is himself God-begotten, and under divine protection. The fact that Odysseus has maimed him is a wrong which Poseidon is slow to forgive, whereas the gigantic, monstrous foes whom Beowulf has to meet are identified with the foes of God himself. And this is integral to understanding the nature of Beowulf, given that it was most likely a story that was first majoritively, if not entirely, pagan in its conception. Because the Scandinavian and Germanic heathens not only had no quarrel with the existence of various mythological creatures, such as giants, ogres, elves, dwarves, and other such creatures that we now commonly associate with fairy tales, but their entire worldview hinged upon their existence, with creatures such as Fenrir the wolf and Jormungandr the world serpent playing integral roles in the fate of Midgard. With the Saxon conquest of England Many of these beliefs in giants and elves took root on our island, and it was a task of the Christian missionaries to suffocate these superstitions. But it's clear that these folkloric creatures continued to persist in the minds of the common folk, and so in setting Beowulf to parchment, it becomes necessary for the Beowulf poet to create some reconciliation on two particular points. Firstly, where can the monsters in Beowulf come from a Christian perspective? And secondly, should paganism be wholly condemned, and by extension the deeds and bravery of the Anglo-Saxons' Germanic forefathers be disowned? First point, we've already established from the text that the poet devised a theological explanation out of the sins of Cain for why such monsters exist in the world of Beowulf. Not only is the writing for the battles brimming with vitality and vividness, but they represent absolute good conquering absolute evil, whilst simultaneously staying within the Germanic heroic tradition. Grendel is a monster, a descendant of the biblical Cain, who slew his brother Abel and became the first murderer. He is a damned and deformed creature. Not only is he cursed to bear the sin of his ancestral sinner, but he also commits sin himself. And Grendel's defeat brings on the wrath of his mother. Now, Grendel's mother is a very interesting character because she squarely fits into the chaotic feminine archetype. She lives out in the fens, in the wilds, and is in many ways a typical example of that den mother. There is no morality built around her, there is only mere survival. And she represents an existential threat because of her ability to give birth to more monsters, to brood more spawns from the descendants of Cain. And therefore, with new life that she brings into the world, she will continue to bring more terrors and more evil along with her. She's described numerous times, depending on your translation, as monstrous and she-wolf. And it's clear that every aspect of her character could only really be described as feral. But then comparatively, if you were to juxtapose her with the other most significant female character within the story, which is Wealhtheow, who is the wife of King Hrothgar of the Shieldings, and she brings that more positive feminine quality. She brings healing and reconciliation. And this is seen by the fact of when she passes the mead cup around the hall and between different people, which is obviously a very old tradition in Germanic societies for creating bonds of social harmony and friendship when two men drink from the same cup. And so against the destructive vengeance of Grendel's mother, Wealhtheow manages to bring some nurturing order that is wonderfully compatible with the social order that the men also reinforce in society. And then I suppose it actually just makes sense, now having spoken about Grendel and also his mother, to speak about the third monster that Beowulf actually has to grapple with in the story, which is of course the dragon. And what's interesting about the dragon is it's actually one of the monsters in the story that does actually have some basis in biblical scripture. Because according to Book of Revelation 12 through 9, it states that, "And the great dragon was thrown down, the ancient serpent, called the devil and Satan, who deceives the whole world. He was thrown down to the earth, and his angels were thrown down with him." So whether or not Satan turns into a literal dragon or a metaphorical one, this goes a long way in biblical history for why we in the West have a conception of dragons as tyrannical, bloodthirsty, and merciless creatures, which is in total contradiction to the more Eastern cultural perceptions as dragons as omens of wisdom and good fortune and wealth and prosperity. And so if a dragon is by its very nature satanic, then that naturally also means that it is an inversion of Christian morality itself. And so the dragon represents the heroic but bent towards evil. Both Beowulf and the dragon are strong, proud, and have great wealth, but with the dragon, these are corrupted into negative qualities such as greed and malice and destruction. It's one of the very interesting facts of the text of Beowulf that the theme of gift-giving is given such prominence within the text. Beowulf gives gifts and is given gifts by Hrothgar and by Hygelac. Even Unferth, the man who originally scorns Beowulf and mocks him and is suspicious of him, when Beowulf goes to fight Grendel's mother, Unferth gives him a sword, which is her thing. And though this sword is not actually effective against Grendel's mother, it is symbolic between Beowulf and Unferth of a token of goodwill, that Unferth actually wants Beowulf to go in safety and protection. Whereas when you look at the juxtaposition of this sharing of riches, this sharing of wealth, this sharing of gifts that happens in the civilized world of Heorot's Hall, compare that with the dragon's plunder, where the loss of but a single jeweled cup results in the dragon breaking out into wrathful vengeance, because what it's actually threatened by is the fact that one single person decided to challenge its supremacy and its dominion. And also, what's more, unlike Grendel and Grendel's mother, the dragon represents a more existential and timeless elemental threat, because the wealth on which it sits, the very hoard of the dragon, is the accruement of generations and generations of wealth by a race of people who no longer exist.
If you enjoyed this piece of premium content from the Lotus Eaters, head to our website where you can find more.